The fire had eaten the house in silence. It hadn't roared the way fires usually do. It had crept like a whisper through the wood, dancing over the thatched roof in the dead of night, wrapping its fingers around beams and beds and bones until everything collapsed into ash. And when the villagers arrived with their buckets of water and cries of alarm, there was nothing left but black smoke and a child sitting in the dirt, her hands wrapped around her knees, her face blank. She made no sound. She did not cry. They said it was the wind that started it. Or maybe the lantern. Or maybe something darker, something no one wanted to name in the open. But no one could ask the girl what happened because she would not speak. Not then. Not when the elder crouched before her and asked her name. Not when the women wrapped her in cloth and pulled her from the smoldering ruins. Not even when they began to whisper that the girl must be cursed, because how could a child survive such a fire and not scream? The girl's name was once known in the village. A soft, bright name with meaning behind it, chosen by her mother after a long fast and prayer under the baobab tree. But in the weeks that followed the fire, that name faded from people's tongues. Her father, whose body was never found, had taken 2 wives. The first had been her mother, quiet and strong. The second, younger and cunning, had always kept her distance. But when the child was found alone and motherless, it was this second wife who stepped forward to take her in. She did not do so out of love. She did it because the compound the first wife left behind was larger and well-built, with 3 cooking pots, a sturdy granary, and a garden that still grew yams untouched by the flames. She said, "I will keep the girl," and the elders nodded, relieved to place the burden somewhere. The second wife moved into the first wife's space and brought the girl with her. From that day on, the child was no longer called by her name. She was simply Girl. Girl, fetch water. Girl, sweep the floor. Girl, clean the goat's pen. The woman never looked her in the eyes when she gave orders. And when she spoke of her to others, it was with a tone dipped in pity and disgust. "The girl eats like a ghost," she'd say. Or, "The girl watches too much." And the villagers would nod, wary, unsure what lived behind the child's quiet stare. No one dared get close. Children whispered stories about her. Some said she never blinked. Others said they saw her walk barefoot across hot coals without flinching. The girl said nothing to defend herself. She didn't say anything at all. She listened. She worked. She breathed. In time, even the girl began to forget her name. She searched for it at night, lying on a reed mat beneath a cracked ceiling, staring at the sliver of moonlight on the wall. Sometimes she whispered syllables into the dark, trying to piece together the sound of it. But the name danced just beyond her reach, like the echo of a song she once knew but hadn't heard in years. She remembered her mother's hands, rough palms and soft fingertips, and the sound of her laugh when water spilled or chickens ran wild. She remembered her father's shadow, broad and tall, smelling of sweat and wood smoke. But their voices blurred now, like breath on glass. The woman, her stepmother, rarely touched her except to pull her ear or shove her aside. But she touched everything else that had once belonged to the girl's family. She wore the mother's beads, repainted the walls with new symbols, burned all the old cloths and claimed the goats and pots and dried herbs as her own. What the girl once thought of as home turned into a place of silent rituals. Washing, cooking, grinding, cleaning. A place where her footsteps had to be quiet and her presence even quieter. Still the girl watched. She watched everything. She noticed how her stepmother kept a small gourd under her sleeping mat, how she whispered into it some nights and locked the door behind her. She saw the way her fingers trembled when the rains came late, and how she poured salt in a circle around the house when owls hooted too loud. She watched the woman spit 3 times whenever someone mentioned the girl's mother's name, as if to banish the ghost. But the girl did not believe in ghosts. She believed in memory. She believed in silence. The villagers began to forget she had ever been anything but the girl. They stopped asking how she was. They no longer offered bits of mango when she passed. She became a shadow among them, moving through the market unseen, standing in line at the well with her clay pot, her bare feet white with dust. Some thought she couldn't speak at all. Some believed she had lost her tongue in the fire. Only the old herbalist, half blind and mostly mad, sometimes called her Little Ember. But even he never used her true name. And so the girl lived like this, nameless, wordless, rootless. But deep inside her, beneath the soot and silence, something ancient stirred. Not grief. Not rage. Something older. A knowing. Something that remembered her name even if the world did not. Every morning began with the scraping sound of a broom made from dry, thorny twigs dragged across the packed earth. The girl rose before the sun, her fingers already aching before they touched the first bucket, the first calabash, the first piece of wood that needed stacking. The stepmother would grunt from her mat and mutter curses beneath her breath, never thanking, never acknowledging, only commanding. "Use the ash," she would say. "You don't need soap. Soap is for clean things." The ash came from the cooking fire, coarse, gray, still warm. The girl scooped it into a broken gourd and mixed it with water, rubbing it into pots until her nails turned black. If the soot smeared rather than vanished, the stepmother would snatch the pot and fling it at the ground, shouting, "You've made it worse again. You make everything worse." She would have to start again. Always again. She was made to clean the latrine hole with a thorn branch tied to a stick. She was told to wash the animals' feet when the rains turned the ground to sludge. When she touched the food, she was warned not to poison it. "Your hands are foul," her stepmother snapped. "If I could peel your skin off, I would." Sometimes the villagers passed by and saw her kneeling in the yard, bent over a task too big for her thin shoulders. Some shook their heads but walked on. Others whispered to their children, "Don't speak to her. The cursed one." A few offered pity in their eyes but never their mouths. No one offered to help. The girl never asked for help. She scrubbed the compound until her knees turned to stone. She carried firewood until her back ached like an old woman's. Her hands became raw maps of scars, small slices from thorns, deep burns from hot pots, bruises from buckets dropped too fast. The stepmother never cared. If anything, she seemed pleased by the damage, as if it confirmed what she had always believed. "You bring dirt with you," she hissed one day, watching the girl sweep the same spot twice. "Even the wind avoids you. You're a walking grave." The girl didn't look up. Not because she believed it, but because there was no use denying it. Not out loud. She remembered a time when her mother taught her how to sweep using soft palm fibers, when cleaning was not a punishment but a rhythm, a song. Her mother had taught her that water listened, that ash remembered, that a woman's hands could bless or curse with equal weight. But now, under the harsh hand of her stepmother, her hands knew only pain. Her fingers were tools, not instruments. Her breath was held like something she had to pay for. At night, she soaked her hands in cold water and held them above her face, watching the moonlight catch in the swollen lines. She would try to count the stars to forget the ache, but the sky often blurred. Sometimes she felt the sting of tears, but she never let them fall, not then. Not where they could be seen. The worst tasks always came on market days, when the stepmother went to town and left her a list so long it curled like a snake. Clean the cooking stones. Scrub the gourd inside out. Sweep the chicken coop. "Wash my feet when I return," she would bark, slapping the list into the girl's hand. "And don't rest like the dead, or I'll make you wish you were." She never rested. Not even when her legs trembled. Not even when her fingers split open and left streaks of red in the water. The thorns didn't just pierce her skin, they stayed in, sometimes for days, small needles of pain that pulsed every time she bent her hands. Once, a thorn festered for so long her fingers swelled twice its size. She said nothing. She chewed a leaf she'd seen her mother use once and tied the pulp with a dirty rag. It healed, eventually, but left a hard knot under the skin. Another mark to carry. One evening, she was kneeling beside the water pot, scrubbing its mouth with a stone when a small boy from the village crept near. He was no older than 6. Curious eyes. Quick feet. He watched her for a while in silence, then asked, "Does it hurt?" She froze. It had been weeks, maybe months, since anyone had spoken to her like a person. She looked at him. His eyes were round, unsure. "Yes," she said softly. The boy blinked, surprised she could speak. Then he nodded and ran off, not saying another word. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The question. The boy's small voice. The word she had spoken aloud. She turned it over in her mind like a seed. Yes. Yes, it hurt. It hurt to be treated like rot. It hurt to hear the word cursed, thrown at her like stones. It hurt to know that no one remembered her name or the stories her mother told. It hurt to feel herself folding smaller and smaller into someone who was no longer whole. But it also stirred something. Not rage. Not hope. Just presence. A reminder that she could still feel. That the pain meant she was still here. And maybe that was enough. For now. Because one day, she didn't know when, something would change. Something had to. She would keep cleaning with ash and thorns. She would keep enduring the beatings of silence. She would keep burying her pain into the earth with each scrape of her hands. But the pain was piling up. Quietly. And pain, when buried too long, grows teeth. The basin was always waiting before sunset. Wide, shallow, dented from years of use, it sat just outside the compound gate like a silent judge. The girl knew the moment the shadows stretched long across the earth, she would be called. Not by name, never by name, but with a sharp clap of the hands like calling a stray dog. Girl. Water. Now. She would rise without a word, pick up the clay jug balanced beside the firewood stack and walk to the well. The trip there was long enough to feel the eyes on her. The other women drawing water would turn their backs just slightly. Children would glance, whisper, then return to their games. She moved like a ghost, but one everyone could see, one no one dared acknowledge. When she returned, she would pour the water carefully into the basin, making sure it didn't splash or spill. Then she would wait. Her knees bent. Her head lowered. Hands in her lap. The air always seemed to still before the stepmother emerged, as if even the wind didn't want to witness what was about to happen. The stepmother made it a show. Every evening she strutted out from the compound in her long wrapper, her ankles adorned with shining brass rings, her wrists jangling with beads that once belonged to the girl's mother. She would settle on the carved stool placed just beside the basin, roll up her wrapper, and thrust her dusty feet forward without a word. The girl's job was to wash them. Not as a daughter might do in love, but as a servant does in shame. With every stroke of the rag, every scoop of water poured over cracked heels and hardened soles, the humiliation thickened in the air like smoke. The stepmother would sigh loudly, stretch her legs further, sometimes flicking her foot to splash water on the girl's face. And always the villagers would watch. They pretended not to, but their necks craned from cooking pots, from behind walls, from paths they conveniently walked past right at that moment. A few laughed, soft and cruel. Some pitied, though they did nothing. Most just stared. It wasn't the act of washing that shamed the girl, it was how it was turned into a spectacle, a ritual meant to carve her lower and lower into the ground. She scrubbed silently, tears building behind her eyes. She never let them fall. Not often. Not unless they slipped out before she could catch them. But one evening they did. That night, her hands were rawer than usual. Her back ached from carrying yams all day. Her head buzzed with exhaustion. As she bent over the basin, the stepmother shoved her foot too hard, and her forehead knocked the edge. The dull pain shot through her skull, and before she could stop it, 2 tears spilled from her eyes and hit the water. She wiped her face quickly, ashamed, angry, tired. The stepmother laughed. "Even the water pities you now," she said, shaking her foot. "Keep scrubbing. My heel's still dirty." The girl obeyed. She dipped the rag, rubbed harder, splashed water again. Then she noticed something. The water wasn't clear anymore. It was darker. She blinked. Rubbed her eyes. Maybe it was dust. Or shadow. Or the trick of the fading sun. But no. The water in the basin was turning black. It spread slowly like ink dropped in milk. From where her tears had fallen, the darkness bloomed outward, swallowing the ripples. By the time she lifted the next scoop to wash the other foot, the entire basin shimmered dark and thick. She froze. Her hand trembled. She looked up, just slightly, and saw that her stepmother hadn't noticed yet. The woman was too busy mocking a neighbor passing by. But the neighbor had paused. Her eyes were fixed on the basin. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. The girl looked back at the water. It wasn't just black, it was heavy. Like the ashes from the fire that had taken her family, thickened by rain. The rag floated limp and strange in it. When she touched the surface, her fingers tingled, not pain, not heat, just awareness. She finished washing, slowly, carefully. The stepmother stood, grumbling, shaking her feet dry. "You made it too cold tonight," she snapped. "You always ruin things." She didn't notice the water. Or perhaps she did and dismissed it. The girl poured it away as always, but the earth drank it slower this time. Where the water soaked in, the ground stayed black for longer than it should have. That night, as she lay on her mat, the image of the basin swam in her mind. She pressed her hands together and remembered the way the darkness spread from her tears. She whispered to herself over and over, a rhythm her mother once sang when grinding grain. She didn't remember all the words, but the sound comforted her. In the morning, the basin was washed and clean. No one spoke of what they saw. But from that day on, the air around the evening ritual felt tighter. The villagers stared harder. Some avoided looking altogether. The stepmother barked her commands louder, laughed more forcefully. And the girl? The girl watched the water every night. And every night, whether it was one tear or two, the blackness returned. Small at first. Then darker. Then deeper. As if something had been waiting for her to cry. Something that had lived long beneath the silence. Something that was not yet finished speaking. The basin had always been a thing of dread. But now it was something more. She began to notice it the third night after the water turned black. At first there was a hum. Barely audible. Like wind slipping between cracked wood or a faraway flute. She thought it was her ears playing tricks on her, tired from long days and colder nights. But then she heard it again. Clear. Closer. It came after the house fell silent. After the fire was reduced to embers. After her stepmother's snoring filled the room like a choking fog. The sound came from where the basin was stored, behind the goat pen, propped upside down beside a broken stool. The girl held her breath and listened. The first word was not a word at all. It was her name. Her real name. Not girl. Not cursed thing. Not useless shadow. Her mother's voice said it. Soft, round, coated with warmth. The name struck her like a slap and a hug at once. She hadn't heard it spoken in so long that it rang foreign in her ears. But her heart knew it immediately. A rush of heat went through her chest and tears threatened to rise, but she bit her lip hard and stayed still. The next night the basin whispered again. This time the voice was different, older, deeper. A man's voice. One she didn't know. But he said her name too, followed by another word she didn't understand. A word in the old tongue. One her mother used only when she sang near the river, or when she told stories at night. By the fifth night the basin no longer waited for silence. Even while she scrubbed the compound in daylight, she felt something pulling at the edge of her hearing, like someone clearing their throat from behind her. She would turn. Nothing. But her skin would prickle and her name would thrum in her ears. When she fetched the basin for the evening ritual, it felt heavier than before. She stared into its empty mouth and saw a shimmer, not reflection, not shadow, but a shifting darkness like smoke under glass. She looked away quickly and poured in the water. Her stepmother complained again about the chill, but this time the girl said nothing. She was listening. The villagers noticed her quiet even more now. She's gone deeper into her head, they whispered. See how she walks like she's following something? The girl heard them, but they were far away, like echoes bouncing off distant walls. Her world was changing in layers and none of them could see it. One night, when the house was still and the moon was nothing but a sliver, the basin spoke again. This time many voices came. Whispering in unison. Not harshly. Not like the jeering of the villagers or the bite of her stepmother's tongue. These voices were smooth, rhythmic, like river stones beneath a current. They said her name. Over and over. Then others began to speak behind it. She watches well. She bears the marks. She remembers, though they tried to make her forget. She sat up from her mat, eyes wide. Her hands trembled. She tiptoed to the back of the compound, barefoot, avoiding the creaking wood, the snoring beasts. She knelt beside the basin and placed her palms gently on its rim. It was cold, but the kind of cold that buzzes with energy, not lifelessness. Who are you? She whispered. Silence. She leaned closer. Who are you? She said again, a little louder. Then a sigh rose from the basin, audible and real. Not imagined. It fluttered like a leaf caught in a breeze. And then a single word came, spoken in a tongue that rang through her bones. Blood. The next day her chores felt heavier. Not because she was tired, but because her mind was spinning with questions. She remembered her mother's eyes, how they shimmered when she spoke of old things. How she used to press her hand to the girl's chest and whisper, "You carry many." Back then she hadn't understood. Now the words came back like sparks. She began to see things too. Out of the corner of her eye, shapes moved. When she fetched water, shadows slid across the surface. When she bent over the fire, the flames sometimes bent toward her, as if reaching for her breath. Once, while walking past the elder's hut, she heard her name spoken from inside, but when she looked, no one was there. She stopped flinching at the voices. Instead she listened. She even began to speak back. Quietly. At night. When the basin was near. Why me? Where are you? What do you want? The voices never answered clearly. But they always said her name. They always called her child. They always told her to wait. You are close, one said. Closer than you think. One evening, while pouring the water into the basin, her stepmother glanced down and froze. For the first time she noticed something. The water wasn't rippling like it should. It sat still, too still, like a mirror with no reflection. Her stepmother narrowed her eyes, looked at the girl and muttered, "What trick are you playing?" The girl did not answer. She had nothing to say to her anymore. That night the basin whispered again. But this time it didn't whisper her name. It whispered her mother's. And behind it came the laughter of other women, low, fierce, ancient. The laughter didn't mock. It welcomed. It called her in like a circle being opened. She wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes. Whatever this was, curse, blessing, or something older, it was waking. And it had chosen her. There was a door in the back of the house that the girl had never been allowed to touch. It was made of thick, dark wood, older than the other doors in the compound. Unlike the others, which were patched or slightly crooked with age, this one stood perfectly upright. No light ever came from beneath it. No sound leaked out. Her stepmother had told her on the very first day, "That room is not for you. Don't even look at it." And she hadn't. Not for years. Not even when sweeping past it, not even when her curiosity burned bright and sharp inside her chest. She had learned to smother that fire. She had learned to keep her eyes down and her questions locked behind her teeth. But then the voices came. Ever since the basin began to whisper, the world around her had changed. The air inside the house had become heavier. The shadows longer. And when she walked past that forbidden door, the silence behind it felt less empty, more like something waiting. She started to hear sounds, soft thumps, faint echoes, breaths that didn't belong. Some nights, when her stepmother snored and the wind pushed against the windows, the girl swore she heard her name rise faintly from behind that locked wood. Once she paused her sweeping and leaned close. The door seemed to breathe, exhaling a warm, musty smell, earth, clay, and something else. Something familiar. She didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. But the whispers in the basin grew stronger. They started urging her. "Go," they would murmur. "Open. See." She resisted for nights, afraid. If her stepmother caught her near that door, the punishment would be cruel. But the pull became too strong. Curiosity was no longer just a feeling, it was a command humming in her bones. One night, long after the coals had cooled and the animals had gone still, she rose from her mat barefoot and quiet. Her stepmother slept with her back to the wall, a deep snore rising from her throat. The girl crept across the room, heart pounding against her ribs. Every floorboard creak was a warning drum, but she kept going. She reached the door. She touched it. It was warmer than it should have been. Her fingers traced the frame, feeling for something, anything, that could let her in. She had never seen a key. But her mother had once taught her that some doors didn't need keys. They needed remembrance, intention, belonging. She closed her eyes. She whispered her name, the one the basin had returned to her. She said it 3 times. Then she pushed. The door groaned but did not resist. It opened slowly, a breath at a time, and the room exhaled a memory. The air inside was thick with dust, but it wasn't the kind of dust that comes from neglect. It was the kind that protects, that preserves, that holds secrets like soil holds seeds. The room was small, windowless, and lined with shelves. On the shelves were items covered in cloth, gourds, bundles of herbs now brittle and faded, and a bowl full of dried river stones. Against the wall was a low stool with carvings on its legs, the same carvings her mother used to draw into the dirt with her fingers while telling stories. In the center of the room lay a woven mat, and on it sat 3 things untouched by dust. A small drum, a strand of colored beads, and a water gourd with a leather strap. She dropped to her knees before them. The drum was old, but the skin stretched over it was smooth and strong. She ran her fingers over it and felt a vibration deep in her chest, like a heartbeat. The beads were red, blue, and bone white, exactly like the ones her mother had worn when she danced in the rain. The gourd smelled faintly of smoke and something sweet, something alive. She picked up the drum and held it close. Suddenly the room shimmered. Not with light but with presence. The air shifted. She felt eyes, many eyes, not watching her but welcoming her. The walls no longer felt like walls. The silence no longer felt empty. This was not a locked room. This was a memory her stepmother had tried to bury. Her mother had lived here. Not just in this house but in this very room. She had sat on this mat. She had touched this drum. She had sung here, prayed here, called on her ancestors with this gourd in hand. This room wasn't just forbidden, it was sacred. The girl stood, the beads clenched in her palm. She could almost hear her mother's voice now, soft and steady, singing the old river songs. Songs that reminded the sky who it belonged to. Songs that told the earth not to forget its daughters. Behind her, the house remained silent. She tucked the beads into the fold of her wrapper and lifted the gourd by its strap. It felt right in her hand, as though it had been made for her grip. She touched the drum one last time before stepping out and pulling the door gently shut behind her. She didn't lock it. She didn't need to. The room had opened for her now. Its secrets, once buried, had remembered her. And for the first time since the fire took her world, she felt a piece of herself return. Not loudly. Not fully. But truly. The morning sun rose dull and heavy, its usual golden blaze smothered beneath a thick, gray haze. The villagers whispered among themselves as they looked toward the dying fields. Leaves curled like ancient scrolls, brittle and brown. The village well, once echoing with the laughter of children and the chatter of women fetching water, now gurgled dry, coughing up mud instead of life. The elders gathered in the square. Wrinkled brows furrowed deeper as they debated in low tones. It began the same night the basin water turned black, one of them murmured. The girl. She brought something back with her. She's cursed, said another. Mark my words. No name, no root, just shadows in her wake. At the heart of it all stood the stepmother, her face pale with manufactured concern. I have tried, she said solemnly, hands dramatically folded. I have raised her like one of my own. But something dark surrounds her. Even in the house I feel it. Something stirs at night. Her voice cracked perfectly, rehearsed like a play. It began with her tears, then the basin, and now our land. The decision came swiftly. The girl would be brought to the village shrine. Let the spirits speak. Let the priest test her. She was pulled from her mat at dawn. No one spoke her name, not that they remembered it. Girl, someone barked, get up. She followed barefoot, flanked by guards and onlookers. The villagers lined the path in silence. No laughter today. Only heavy stares. Some clutched charms, others spit to the ground as she passed. At the shrine the priest was already waiting. He wore a robe the color of ash and his eyes, too bright for their sockets, glinted with something unreadable. The shrine was a dome of woven reeds, sacred and eerie. Within it burned incense and smoldering leaves that made the air thick and dizzying. The priest circled her slowly. This girl, he said aloud, has brought with her an unknown presence. We must ask the ancestors if she walks in shadow or light. He handed her a calabash filled with spring water, clear and cool, drawn from the sacred stream beyond the village. Drink, he instructed. Her hands trembled as she raised it. Her lips met the rim, and before the water touched her tongue, it turned black. Gasps rippled like wind through the crowd. The priest did not flinch. He leaned forward, peering into the basin now resting at her feet. He muttered, eyes narrowing. This is not the work of a child. This is ancient. Deep. The girl dropped to her knees, whispering, I didn't ask for this. I never meant. Silence, the priest hissed. You carry something. Something angry. He ordered for the sacred stones to be brought. For pebbles each representing an element. Earth, water, fire, air. They were dropped into a shallow bowl of river clay. Place your hand over the bowl. We will see. She did as told. At first nothing happened. But then the water pebble began to vibrate, spinning fast in place. The clay in the bowl cracked. The wind outside the shrine howled suddenly, strong enough to lift skirts and rattle nearby trees. Then a voice, barely a whisper, escaped from the girl's lips. It wasn't hers. Do not test what you do not understand. The priest stepped back, stunned. The girl's eyes were wide, frightened, but still her mouth moved. She belongs to the river's breath, said the voice. She remembers now. When it was over, she collapsed. The villagers rushed forward, shouting in fear. She's possessed. She spoke in a tongue I haven't heard in decades. The priest lifted a hand. Enough. This is not a simple curse. It is a tie to the old blood. To a power buried by time. She should be banished, someone screamed. No, the priest said. Not yet. Her journey has only begun. That night, back in the compound, the stepmother raged. She slapped the girl, dragged her by the arm and threw her outside. You think you can ruin me? Bring shame into this house. The girl said nothing. Her feet ached. Her ribs were sore. But inside her chest, something was shifting, like a locked door slowly creaking open. That whisper in the shrine, it had felt familiar. Like the basin. Like the room with her mother's drum. That night she dreamed of water. Not black but silver and alive. It surged through her veins, calling her name, not girl, but her real name, the one she had almost forgotten. And when she woke, the wind outside was whispering it again. The air in the shrine is thick with incense and silence. The girl kneels before the blind priest, her hands trembling, the scent of the black water still clinging to her skin. The villagers watch, murmuring among themselves. The priest says nothing for a long time. Then, as if something ancient stirs within him, he lifts his face toward her and speaks her true name, a name no one had uttered since she was a baby. Her heart stops. Gasps ripple through the gathered crowd, but the priest lifts a hand and they fall silent. His gnarled fingers reach for her face, and when they touch her skin, his whole body stiffens. A deep hum escapes his throat, like the beginning of a song too sacred for daylight. He whispers, "You are her child. The water priestess. The one they burned in the yam field." The girl's breath catches. Until now, she had only felt the loss of her mother as an ache with no shape. But here, in the voice of the old priest, the ache finds form. He speaks of her mother's past, how she was the last in a line of women who could speak to rivers, summon fish in drought, call healing from the waves. But men feared her power, especially her husband's family. When a baby drowned in the river, they blamed her and declared her a witch. The priest was younger then. He had tried to stop the mob, but fear was louder than wisdom. They bound her, he says, voice hoarse, tied her to the firewood like a goat. She didn't scream. She sang. And the sky wept the whole night. The girl presses her hands to her mouth. She sees her stepmother's face now in a new light, not just cruel but a keeper of secrets, a silencer of songs. She asks the priest why the water has turned black. He answers, because her grief still runs through it. Because justice has not been done. Because you, her blood, are not where you belong. He then leads her to the inner chamber of the shrine, where jars of sacred water sit undisturbed. One jar shatters when she enters. The liquid inside slithers across the floor like it's alive, forming her mother's name. The priest kneels and weeps. "You are not cursed," he says. "You are called." He tells her that her powers have been trying to wake, through the basin's whispers, the dreams, the shadows. Her mother's spirit waits by the water's edge. She is ready to pass on the final chant. But first, the girl must confront the lie that burned her mother. She must return to the land where the fire was lit. The villagers begin to stir uneasily. A few remember the priestess. Some even wept during her burning. One old woman whispers, "We didn't know. We were afraid." The priest declares that fear is not an excuse anymore. The girl must walk her mother's path, not to suffer but to finish what was interrupted. To restore the water in her name. He gives her a cloth, her mother's last cloth, buried secretly by the shrine door. It smells of ash and river reeds. When she touches it, she hears her mother's lullaby for the first time. She doesn't cry. She simply nods. Outside, the clouds begin to gather. The villagers look up. Rain is coming, but it smells not like any rain they've known. It smells of secrets surfacing, of names remembered, of songs returning. The old priest sat cross-legged before the village shrine, a shallow bowl of ashes before him. Around them, the villagers watched in anxious silence, their eyes flickering between the girl and the smoke that coiled above the fire pit. The wind had stilled. Even the birds, usually restless at dusk, had gone silent. The girl's hands trembled as she stepped forward, holding a fragment of the broken basin, the one that had whispered her name. The priest reached out, his gnarled fingers steady despite his blindness, and took the shard from her. "This came from the black water," he murmured. "The memory of your blood is thick in it. We will speak to it." The priest began to chant, his voice low and trembling like an old drum. The ashes in the bowl stirred, though no wind touched them. He dropped the basin shard into the mix and suddenly the ashes bloomed with color, pale blue, soft green, a flicker of crimson. Then smoke rose, dark and curling, and within it, a vision began to take form. The villagers leaned in wide-eyed. The girl felt her heart hammering in her chest, not out of fear but recognition. She knew, even before the smoke shaped itself, that this would not be a story of strangers. This was her beginning. The fire showed a compound much like their own, her father's household. A woman, regal and strong-eyed, knelt by a river pouring water into a gourd. That woman was her mother. Even without being told, the girl felt it in her bones. She was robed in white, her braids coiled with shells and beads, her body marked with sacred water symbols. "Your mother was a water priestess," the priest said softly as the fire danced. "Beloved by the river, trusted by the spirits. She healed the sick, blessed the crops, and brought rain when the sky refused. But she was envied." The scene changed. Now her mother stood in a gathering of elders. Her face was stern, her voice raised in warning. The girl couldn't hear the words, but she saw the discontent in the elders' faces. One man, her stepmother's father, whispered into her father's ear. Another shook his head. The mother pointed toward something, perhaps a warning of what was to come. They turned their backs on her. The fire swirled again. It was night now. Her mother slept beside a basin, a carved drum at her feet. A shadow crept into the room, a woman, slender, quiet. In her hands was a small clay pot, its contents shimmering with oil and dark powder. She poured it around the room. The girl gasped aloud. The woman was her stepmother. No, someone whispered in the crowd. She came before the marriage, the priest confirmed, still watching the fire. She was not just a stepmother, she was the one who caused the mother's fall. The fire revealed the next horror. Flames licking the edge of the room. Her mother waking, coughing, trying to shield something in her arms. The drum, the gourd, perhaps even the infant version of the girl. Smoke engulfed the house. Her mother disappeared behind it. And then, the faces of the villagers again. Her father, weeping, holding the stepmother as she cried crocodile tears. The fire was blamed on her mother's own magic, they said. The house turned against her. A curse, they called it. And the stepmother was soon after named wife. The smoke above the fire turned red, then black. The priest's voice cracked. She was framed. And silenced. And you, her daughter, were kept near only because the spirits would not allow your death. You were her last anchor. The girl's legs gave out and she knelt beside the fire. Her body shook, not from sorrow but from rage and clarity. Everything made sense now, the black water, the whispers, the locked room. Her mother had left traces everywhere. Not to haunt but to guide. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some looked to the stepmother, who now sat trembling on the ground. Her mouth was shut tight, her hands digging into the dirt. She lied, the girl said hoarsely. She murdered my mother, and then blamed her for the darkness that followed. The priest nodded. And the darkness has only grown because the truth was never burned clean. He gestured to the bowl of ashes. You must finish it. Say her name aloud. The girl stared at the bowl. For so long, the name had hovered at the edge of her dreams, spoken in the hush of the wind or the echo of water dripping into the basin. Now it came freely, rising from the very core of her. Naima, she whispered. My mother's name was Naima. The fire leapt. A gust of warm wind swept through the shrine, lifting the smoke into the sky. The villagers gasped as it spiraled upward and scattered into the dusk. A hush followed, one so complete it felt like the land itself was exhaling. Then the priest smiled. She hears you now. The girl felt a warmth press against her chest, as though someone's hand had rested there. And though no voice spoke aloud, she knew what it meant. The truth had risen, and it would not be buried again. That night, the sky hung low, swollen with something ancient. The girl walked barefoot through the cracked dust of the courtyard, the air brittle around her like a drum skin stretched too tight. Her dress clung to her, soaked in dried sweat and smoke from the earlier rituals. In one hand she held the gourd her mother once carried, now filled with ash and water. In the other, a single white bead taken from the drum she'd found in the forbidden room. She had not spoken a word since the priest's revelation, but something inside her had awakened. A chant hummed inside her bones, older than language. The villagers followed at a distance. They did not speak her name, for now they were unsure what to call her. Cursed girl, water child, daughter of the drowned? Some kept their eyes down. Others watched with the hollow curiosity of those who had seen too much suffering to believe in change. But they came nonetheless, drawn by the thickening sky and the scent of something turning. She reached the baobab tree at the edge of the village, its roots gnarled like the hands of old gods, its trunk wide enough to swallow secrets. Her mother used to sit beneath it, the priest had said, whispering prayers to the water spirits that lived in its shade. Now the girl knelt in the dust, laid the gourd before her and closed her eyes. Her fingers touched the bead to her lips. The wind came first. It rose sudden and low, curling around the trunks of trees and slipping under doors. Ash stirred in the gourd. A tremor ran through the earth, subtle but deep, as if something below had heard her presence. She dipped her fingers into the water and ash and touched her forehead, then her chest. A single tear fell, not of sadness but of return, of remembering. Then came the chant. It was not in her voice, not exactly. It came from within and without, from the ground and the wind and the ancestors hovering just beyond the veil. The sound made the villagers shiver. The air grew heavy, thick with waiting. Clouds boiled above. The sky cracked with a flash of silver, and a low growl of thunder rolled like a drum waking from slumber. Then the first drop fell. Black. Thick as ink, it struck the earth before the baobab and sizzled. The girl did not move. Another drop. Then another. The villagers gasped. Some turned to run, but they didn't get far. The rain did not fall across the village. It fell only on the stepmother's compound. A boundary, invisible but absolute, formed at the outer edge of her home. Inside it, the rain poured, pitch black, relentless, hissing as it touched thatch and skin and stone. The rest of the village remained dry as bone. The line between blessed and condemned was drawn clearly for all to see. Screams erupted from within the compound. The stepmother emerged, drenched, clutching her head. Her fine robes stained dark and clung to her form like wet leaves. She looked up at the sky, mouth open in terror. "What is this?" she shrieked. "What have you done?" The girl remained silent, still kneeling. The chant grew louder now, not from her mouth but from the very ground. The baobab's branches shook, though no wind touched them. The gourd began to boil. The bead glowed faintly in her palm. The stepmother stumbled through the rain toward the baobab, crossing the threshold, and the black rain vanished from her skin. It would not follow her outside the line. It knew its target. She turned to look back at her home. The compound groaned. The wooden beams swelled with the dark water. Roofs sagged. The firewood pile burst into steam. Chickens screamed from their cages and burst out, feathers soaked, running wild. The villagers whispered. A few dropped to their knees. Others simply stood with their mouths open. Elders exchanged looks and said nothing, for what could be said? They had called the girl cursed. They had watched her suffer. And yet it was not her the storm had come for. From the sky, a new sound rumbled, deep, echoing. Not thunder. It sounded like a voice. Or many voices singing together. Names. Names long buried. Names of women who had served the water, punished by fire. The girl lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were dark and calm. The stepmother screamed again, begging the villagers for help. But none moved. Her own husband's clan now stood like statues. Even the priest, old and blind, sat near the baobab and nodded once. "The ancestors have seen," he said, "and the water has returned to judge." Lightning cracked, and this time it struck the heart of the compound. A tree burst into flame. The fire glowed blue then gold. The rain did not quench it. The girl rose. Her hands still glistened with the water and ash. She walked slowly toward the edge of the baobab's shade. The black rain stopped instantly as she moved, as if it bowed to her passing. She stood at the boundary of the compound and met her stepmother's eyes. There was no hate in her gaze. Only knowing. Only memory. The stepmother fell to her knees, crying, wailing, pleading for mercy. The girl simply turned and walked back to the baobab. She placed the bead inside the gourd, poured the rest of the water onto the roots, and whispered the final words of her chant. The clouds began to dissolve. And in the stillness that followed, the first true rain in months fell gently across the rest of the village. Clear, sweet, and silver.